Except that one afternoon in November, Nathan came home 3 hours earlier than expected. His flight had been canceled. He was tired and irritated and carrying his briefcase like it had personally offended him. And as he pushed open the front door of his own home, he heard something. Not loud, not dramatic, not the kind of sound that makes you grab a phone and dial 911. It was soft, almost musical. It was a child's voice, singing. Nathan stood completely still in his own foyer, his hand still on the door handle, listening. He didn't have a child in that house. His daughter Lily was at boarding school in Vermont. The estate was supposed to be empty except for Clara. So whose voice was that? And why was it coming from the basement? Before I tell you what Nathan found behind that door, and I promise you, nothing you're imagining right now is close to the truth, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever misjudged someone completely, if you've ever looked at a person every single day and never really seen them, if you believe that the people who save us are sometimes the ones we never bothered to look at, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. Real, raw, and impossible to stop watching. And drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever kept a secret not to protect yourself, but to protect someone else? Because what Clara was hiding in that basement wasn't for her. It was never for her. Now let's go back to that door. Nathan Calloway was 47 years old and had spent the last decade being very good at one thing: making money. He'd built Calloway Capital from a small real estate fund into one of the most profitable private equity firms on the East Coast. Forbes had mentioned him twice. His name appeared on the donor walls of 3 hospitals and a children's wing at a museum in Manhattan that he had visited exactly once for the ribbon cutting. He was not a bad man. That's the thing that's important to understand here. Nathan wasn't cruel. He wasn't calculating or selfish in the way that makes people easy to hate. He was just absent. Not physically. Nathan was always somewhere. Always in a room, in a meeting, in a car being driven somewhere important. But the version of himself that he brought to those places was the professional version, the managed version. The version that shook hands and remembered names and knew exactly what to say in any situation. The father version, the human version, the version that might have actually noticed the people living in his own house. That version had been filed away somewhere around the time his wife Diane left, 3 years ago, a Tuesday afternoon. Lily was 9. Diane had looked at Nathan across the kitchen table and said something that had taken him completely off guard. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so perfectly, precisely true. "Nathan," she'd said, "you've been gone for years. You just haven't left yet." She moved to Portland. She remarried. She and Nathan shared custody of Lily in that careful, civilized way that people do when they've decided that being good divorced parents is more important than being anything else to each other. Lily spent school terms in Vermont, holidays split between Connecticut and Portland, and summers mostly at the estate with Clara. Nathan had hired her 22 months ago through an agency. The reference check had come back clean. Her previous employers, a family in Greenwich, had called her indispensable and the most trustworthy person we've ever employed. They'd only stopped using her because they'd relocated to London. Nathan had met her exactly 3 times before he hired her. Once for the interview, once to walk her through the house, and once when he'd come downstairs at midnight for a glass of water and found her sitting at the kitchen table, doing what appeared to be math homework. A stack of textbooks spread around her coffee cup, her reading glasses pushed up into her dark hair. He'd been startled. She'd apologized. He'd said it was fine. They'd both pretended it hadn't happened. He didn't ask what she was studying. He didn't ask about her life outside the house. He went back upstairs with his water and his thoughts about the Harrington acquisition and left her alone with her equations. That was Nathan Calloway. That was the man standing in his foyer on that November afternoon, listening to a child's voice floating up from the basement, A man who had lived in the same house as Clara for nearly 2 years and couldn't have told you her last name without looking at a file. Clara Reyes was 33 years old, and she had been carrying more weight for longer than anyone should have to. She'd come to the United States from Guadalajara when she was 19, following her older sister Rosa, who had a work visa and a studio apartment in Queens and a fierce, unshakable belief that things would get better. For a while they had. Clara had learned English faster than she'd expected. She'd taken night classes, cleaned offices during the day, sent money home to her mother every month without fail. She'd gotten her GED, then enrolled in a community college accounting program, paying for it credit by credit with money she saved in a ceramic jar she kept on the windowsill. And then Rosa got sick. It was cervical cancer, stage 2, discovered at a free clinic in the Bronx because Rosa hadn't been able to afford a regular doctor. The treatment was possible, the oncologist said. The prognosis was actually good if they caught it early enough. But the treatment cost money that neither of them had. Clara had stopped taking classes. She'd taken on more work, cleaning houses, cooking for families, doing laundry and ironing and grocery shopping for people who couldn't be bothered to do those things themselves. She worked 18-hour days for 3 years. Rosa survived. 5 years cancer-free now, working as a medical secretary at the same clinic where she'd been diagnosed, her way of paying something back. But the debt Clara had taken on, the medical bills, the loan she'd borrowed from a cousin, the credit card she'd maxed out in a desperate, terrifying month when it looked like Rosa might not make it, that debt had followed her. And then there was Marco. Marco was 5 years old. He had his father's eyes and Clara's stubbornness and a laugh that started in his whole body before it reached his face. He was the kind of child who made strangers stop and smile without quite knowing why. His father, Diego, had been Clara's boyfriend for 4 years. They'd been saving to get married. They'd been planning. And then Diego had been killed by a drunk driver on the FDR Drive on a Wednesday morning in February, 2 years and 4 months ago. Clara had found out she was pregnant 3 weeks after the funeral. She had no family in New York except Rosa. She had a mountain of debt, a grief she didn't have time to properly feel, and a child growing inside her that she had not planned for and could not afford, but would have soaked her hands in fire before she would have given up. So she had done what Clara always did. She figured it out. The agency had placed her with the Calloway estate. The salary was good, better than anything she'd made before. The house was large, the work was manageable, the employer was almost never home. But there was a problem. She couldn't afford childcare. Not real childcare. Not the kind that meant someone safe and warm was watching her son every hour she was working. The waiting lists for subsidized daycare in her area were years long. The private options cost more than her rent. And the agency that had placed her, that had been so careful and thorough in their background check of her, had a strict policy. No children on the premises of the employer's home, non-negotiable. Clara had stared at that policy for a long time. And then she had looked at Marco, who was 6 weeks old and sleeping against her shoulder, and she had made a decision that she knew was wrong, that she knew was a risk, that she knew could cost her everything. She had moved him into the basement. Not abandoned him there. Not locked him away. The basement of the Calloway estate was finished, carpeted, climate-controlled, with its own bathroom and a small utility kitchen. Nathan used it for storage. It was completely separate from the main living areas, with a door that locked from the inside. Clara had turned one corner of it into a home, a second-hand crib. A small rug with cartoon animals, books, toys, a baby monitor she kept clipped to her apron at all times. She had brought Marco there in a soft carrier every morning at 6 and taken him home with her every night. During the days when Nathan was at work, she had cared for him and cleaned the house and cooked and done everything the job required, moving between the basement and the upper floors with a precision born of 11 months of practice. When Nathan came home, Marco was already settled, quiet, content. She had never been caught. Until now. Nathan stood at the top of the basement stairs for almost a full minute before he moved. The singing had stopped. There was a different sound now, a soft babbling, the kind of half-language that very small children use when they're talking to themselves, happy and oblivious and completely unaware that their whole world is about to change. He walked down the stairs slowly. He didn't know why he went slowly. Maybe because some part of him already sensed that whatever was behind this door was going to require him to be careful, to be deliberate, to not make sudden movements. He knocked. The babbling stopped. Silence. Then the sound of movement. Quick, panicked footsteps. Then Clara's voice, very controlled, very even, said, "Mr. Calloway?" "Clara." He paused. "Open the door, please." Another silence. 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then the door opened. Clara stood in the doorway, her face completely still. Behind her, the basement was lit with warm lamplight. Nathan could see a rug he didn't recognize. A small wooden bookshelf filled with children's books. A toy train set arranged in a careful oval on the carpet. And in the center of the room, sitting on the rug and staring up at Nathan with enormous dark eyes and absolutely no fear, was a child. A little boy. Maybe a year old, maybe 18 months. He was wearing a blue onesie with a small dinosaur on the chest. His hair was dark and thick. He was holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. He looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at him. And the child broke into a wide, completely unself-conscious grin and said, clearly and cheerfully, "Hi." Nathan felt something move in his chest, something he couldn't immediately name. He looked at Clara. Clara was watching him with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this moment for 11 months and has rehearsed 100 versions of it and knows that none of them were going to work. "His name is Marco," she said. Her voice didn't shake. But it also wasn't steady. It was somewhere in the middle, held there by pure will. "He's 14 months old. I know what this looks like. I know what this means. I'll pack our things." Nathan said nothing. "I'm sorry," Clara said. And then, very quietly, she said it again. "I'm sorry. I know I broke your trust. I know I broke the rules. But I didn't have anywhere else to take him. I need you to know that I never let him affect my work. He was always safe. He was always—" "Stop," Nathan said. Clara stopped. Nathan stepped into the room. He looked at the bookshelf, Goodnight Moon, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, a worn copy of something in Spanish with a fox on the cover. He looked at the crib in the corner, neatly made. He looked at the toy train on the carpet. He crouched down in front of the little boy. "Hi," he said. Marco considered him seriously for a moment. Then he held out the rabbit. Nathan took it. He looked at it. He gave it back. Marco giggled. Nathan stood up. He looked at Clara for a long moment. She was still in the doorway, waiting, braced for what was coming. "How long?" he said. 11 months. Since he was 3 months old. "Yes." Nathan nodded slowly. He looked around the room again. Took in the small details. The baby monitor clipped to the charger on the wall. The neat stack of diapers. The little shoes arranged by the door. The evidence of a mother who was doing everything she could in the only way she could figure out how. He said, "You've been doing this alone." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered it anyway, yes. And Nathan Calloway, who had not cried since his divorce, who had not been blindsided by anything in years, who prided himself on being the most controlled person in any room he entered, felt something behind his eyes that he hadn't expected at all. They sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Nathan had found Clara doing her homework 2 years ago and hadn't thought to ask a single question. Marco was on Clara's lap, eating crackers and watching Nathan with the bright, serious attention of a child who is meeting someone new and hasn't decided yet what to make of them. Clara talked. She talked for almost 40 minutes. and it was the most she had said to Nathan in the entire 22 months she'd worked for him. She told him about Rosa, about Diego, about the debt and the waiting lists and the agency policy, and the November morning when she'd brought Marco down those stairs for the first time, shaking so badly she'd had to sit on the carpet with him for a few minutes before she could make herself go back up to start breakfast. She told him about the monitor she kept on her at all times, about the way she'd arranged her mornings so that she could get the upstairs chores done while Marco napped, and her afternoons so that she was back in the basement by the time his energy peaked. She told him about the 3 times she'd almost quit, almost packed their things, almost called the agency and confessed everything, and the 3 times she'd looked at her bank account and her list of debts in Marco's face and stayed. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't frame any of it as an excuse. She laid it out the way you lay out evidence. Here is what happened, here is what I did, here is why, here is what it cost. And then she stopped talking and waited. Nathan sat across from her and listened to all of it. He thought about Diane's words, "You've been gone for years. You just haven't left yet." He thought about Lily, about how last summer, Lily had spent 3 weeks at the estate, and Clara had, without being asked, learned Lily's favorite meals, figured out that she liked her toast barely toasted and her hot chocolate with exactly 1 marshmallow, remembered that she was nervous about the history exam she had coming in September, and asked her about it every few days with a genuine, unhurried interest that Nathan had not managed to replicate. Lily had cried when she left to go back to school. Not because of Nathan. Because of Clara. Nathan had been in his study when it happened. He'd heard it through the door, his 12-year-old daughter crying at the front door, telling Clara she didn't want to go. And Clara's voice, low and warm and steady, saying, "I know. But you're going to do so well, and I'll be here when you come back, I promise." Nathan had told himself it was touching. He'd filed it away and gone back to his emails. He looked at Marco now, who had finished his crackers and was attempting to take apart a button on Clara's shirt with the focused determination of a tiny engineer. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nathan asked. Clara looked at him. "You would have fired me." "Maybe," Nathan said. "Not maybe, you would have. You follow the rules, Mr. Calloway. You've never once bent a rule in the time I've worked here. I knew that about you by the end of the first week." Nathan wanted to argue with this. He found that he couldn't. "The agency would have pulled my contract," Clara continued. "I would have been blacklisted. I wouldn't have been able to get another placement. And Marco," she stopped, pressed her lips together. "Marco needs me to work. He needs me to be able to keep working. So you hid him." "So I hid him." Silence settled over the kitchen. Marco had given up on the button and was now resting his head on Clara's shoulder, his eyes getting heavy. Nathan looked at his hands on the table. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. "And I need you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is damaging to you." Clara held his gaze. "All right. Was he safe?" "Every day, for 11 months, was he actually safe?" Clara's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, I would have stopped the moment he wasn't. I would have come upstairs and knocked on your office door and told you everything before I let a single thing happen to him." Nathan nodded. He believed her. He didn't know how he knew that, but he did. He looked at Marco healthy, content, clearly loved, and he believed her completely. "All right," he said. Clara blinked. "All right, meaning what?" Nathan stood up. He went to the refrigerator, poured himself a glass of water, drank half of it, and then turned back to face her. "It means I'm not firing you. And it means we need to make a different arrangement for Marco. He can't stay in the basement." Clara stared at him. "There's a guest suite on the east side of the house that nobody uses," Nathan said. "It's warm. It has windows. He needs windows." He paused. "And it means," he said more quietly, "that I owe you an apology." Clara looked as though he'd said something in a language she didn't speak. "You've been in this house for almost 2 years," Nathan said. "And I never once asked about your life. He stopped. I didn't know you had a son. His voice, at the end of that sentence, did something complicated. I should have known that. The next morning, Nathan came downstairs at 6:15. Not at 8, when Clara had breakfast ready. Not at 7:30, when he usually appeared, already on his phone, already somewhere else. 6:15, before the coffee was made, before anything. Clara was in the kitchen, Marco on her hip, and she looked at Nathan in the doorway with the expression of someone who hasn't decided yet whether last night was real. Nathan said, "Can I?" and held out his hands toward Marco. Clara hesitated for just a moment, the instinct of a mother, automatic and honest, and then passed him over. Marco regarded Nathan with great seriousness. Then he grabbed Nathan's nose. Nathan made a sound that Clara had never once heard from him in 2 years, something between a laugh and a gasp. Completely undignified, completely unguarded. Clara turned away to make the coffee, not because she needed to, because she needed a moment where Nathan couldn't see her face. In the weeks that followed, things changed in the Calloway house in ways that were small and significant at the same time. Nathan came home earlier, not every day, but more. He stopped scheduling things for 6 o'clock, then for 5:30. He started eating dinner at the table, actual dinner, sitting down, at a time when the food was still hot. He started talking to Clara, not about the house, not about schedules or grocery lists. Actually talking. He learned about Rosa. He learned about Diego. He learned that Clara was 2 credits away from finishing her accounting certificate, and had been 2 credits away for 18 months, because she couldn't afford the final courses. He didn't say anything about that last part. He just listened. 3 weeks later, Clara found an envelope on the kitchen counter with her name on it. Inside was a receipt from the community college. 2 courses fully paid, registered in her name for the spring semester. There was no note. She knew who it was from. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding the receipt. Then she went to Nathan's study door and knocked. He said, "Come in." She opened the door. He was at his desk. He looked up. She said, "You didn't have to do that." Nathan said, "I know." A pause. "Thank you," Clara said. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at his desk. "You've been taking care of this house," he said. "And my daughter when she's here. And apparently yourself, completely alone, for longer than anyone should have to." He paused. "It's 2 classes, Clara. It's the least unreasonable thing I've done in years." Clara left his study and went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter and pressed both palms flat against the cool marble and breathed until she was sure she wasn't going to cry. Marco, who was in his bouncy chair by the window, watched her with his solemn, knowing eyes, and then broke into a grin for no reason at all. She laughed. She couldn't help it. She laughed until the tears came anyway. Lily Calloway came home for Christmas break on a Thursday afternoon, stepping out of the car with a duffel bag over one shoulder and her phone in her hand. 12 years old and already possessing the slightly world-weary composure of someone who has spent too much time around adults. She walked into the house, dropped her bag, and said, "Something smells really good." "Pozel," Clara called from the kitchen. "Go wash your hands." Lily went, without argument, the way she always did with Clara. Nathan, standing in the hallway, watched this and thought, she would never have done that for me without a fight. Then Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, and she saw Marco for the first time. Marco was sitting in his high chair, very seriously destroying a piece of bread. He looked up when Lily walked in. He stared at her. Lily stared back. "You have a baby," Lily said to Clara. "I have a toddler," Clara said. "His name is Marco." Marco, as if understanding this was his cue, held out the destroyed piece of bread toward Lily. Lily looked at it. Then at him. "Is he offering me that?" "He offers everyone food," Clara said. "He thinks it means he likes you." Lily took the piece of bread with great solemnity. Marco beamed. By the end of the first evening, Lily had taught Marco how to clap, learned 2 words of Spanish from Clara, eaten 2 bowls of pozole, and fallen asleep on the living room couch with the TV on and Marco tucked against her like a small, warm anchor. Nathan stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at his daughter, asleep with someone else's child curled against her side, and he felt something shift in his chest that had been locked in place for 3 years. He went to find Clara. She was in the kitchen, washing up. He stood in the doorway. "Clara." She turned. "Thank you," he said. He gestured inadequately toward the living room, toward his daughter, sleeping, toward the warmth in the house that he hadn't put there. Clara looked at him for a long moment. "She missed you," Clara said, not accusingly, just honestly. Nathan nodded. He knew. "I missed her too," he said. "I just didn't know how to." He stopped. Started again. "I wasn't very good at showing up." "You're showing up now," Clara said. She turned back to the sink. Nathan stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he picked up a dish towel. "I can dry," he said. Clara looked at the dish towel in his hands, then at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Nathan said. He dried. 6 months later, Clara Rios passed her accounting certification exam on a Tuesday morning in April. She found out while she was on her lunch break, sitting in the small courtyard behind the testing center with her phone in both hands, refreshing the results page every 30 seconds. When the word appeared, "passed," she pressed her phone against her chest and closed her eyes and sat completely still for a moment. Then she called Rosa. Rosa answered on the first ring and screamed so loudly that the woman sitting on the bench across from Clara looked up in alarm. Clara laughed until her cheeks hurt. That evening, she came home to find the kitchen table set with actual tablecloth. Nathan had clearly asked someone for help because it was slightly crooked, and candles and a cake that Lily had baked with Marco's very extensive assistance, which meant there was frosting on the ceiling and 1 candle had been put in sideways. "We made a cake," Lily announced from behind the kitchen island, looking like someone who had survived a minor disaster. "I can see that," Clara said. Marco, sitting on the counter in a position that Clara had told him approximately 40 times was not allowed, held up a spoon covered in chocolate frosting. "Cake," he said. Nathan was standing at the edge of the kitchen, in the same place he'd stood in the doorway so many times, watching from the outside. He was looking at Clara. "Congratulations," he said. Clara looked around the kitchen, at the crooked tablecloth and the sideways candle and the frosting on the ceiling, at Lily, trying to look innocent, at Marco, waving the spoon, at Nathan, who had stopped standing in doorways. "Thank you," she said. "It wasn't enough. It was everything. And that's where I'll leave you. Not with a courtroom verdict. Not with a dramatic revelation or a villain being led away in handcuffs. Just with a crooked tablecloth and a sideways candle, and a woman who had carried everything alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone set the table for her. Sometimes the secret people keep isn't about money or betrayal or a hidden past. Sometimes it's just about survival. About a mother who loved her child so much she was willing to risk everything. Her job, her reputation, her future, just to keep him close. And sometimes the person who finds that secret, instead of punishing it, decides to do something different. Decides to actually look for once. If this story stayed with you, if you felt something watching it, smash that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel, because this is what we do here. We tell stories about the people nobody looks at, and we make you feel everything. Drop a comment below and tell me, who in your life have you been walking past without really seeing? Who is the Clara in your world? I'll see you in the next one.